everyone, and welcome to Creators and Copy. I'm Erica Sietsma, CEO and founder of Autofluencer. And joining me today is Alex Striler. You may have seen him speaking at PRI over the years on sponsorships and how to build great sponsorships. You may have gone to one of his sponsorship summits that he hosts, from any type of racing to off-roading, so many opportunities where he's really educating drivers on how to get those top sponsorships. So welcome, Alex.
Hey, Erica, how are you? Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Good. I'm so excited to have you on. So if someone does not recognize you, or maybe they saw you once or never heard your background, it is pretty impressive. I would love for you to just share quickly with our audience a little bit about your background, how long you've been in motorsports, so that they really get a context of this advice you're going to offer.
Well, I left a fixed income sales career in 1998. I worked on Wall Street, my first real career out of college. And I left that in 1998 to start an internet business, which introduced me to sponsorships in the sense that I sponsored some action sports athletes. At the time, they're mostly skateboarders, surfers, and BMXers. That sort of grew into me becoming the president of a competing company. And in 2005, a friend had an opportunity for me to move over into motorsports because he was hired by a developer to bring an off-road racing series to the West Coast. So he called me up and I made the move. So I've been in sponsorships probably since the late 90s, was issuing them until around 2005. And then in 2005, I started selling them and securing sponsorships. I did that until around 2008. I wrote a book on sponsorships and motorsports marketing. Then I
No big
worked for
deal.
Lucas Oil for about a decade selling
Yeah.
sponsorship and part of the Team Lucas program. And once COVID hit and there were no events that year, I took my sponsorship training essentially and went online. And now I try to educate racers, teams, drivers, sanctioning bodies, what brands want from sponsorship. So it's the whole concept of, instead of giving someone a fish, teach them how to fish. I'm trying to share the knowledge.
And I love it. And I've been lucky to attend some of your speaking sessions and have gotten to know you and have just been, just love the advice you're giving drivers. I think it's really practical, it's really tactical, and even more so, you give them access to hear it from brands, not just you, a talking head. In your summits, you actually have, people from the brands that are making those decisions. You produce a lot of video content that you share on LinkedIn and YouTube. So it's great. And one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on, in a lot of the conversations on Creators and Coffee, right, we talk about how to build successful partnerships, and we give tips to both the creators or drivers as well as to the brands. And I thought one thing really interesting, we've covered a lot of basics and we'll continue to cover them because there's always room for improvement. But I thought it'd be neat to have you talk about what are some of the maybe not obvious tips that people don't typically think of, that are like those aha moments you've had where someone shares something, you're like, oh my gosh, that's genius. Why haven't we been doing that? What are some of those that you would say, that advice or tips you've got that were like, oh my gosh, this has really changed the game?
Well, when I first started selling sponsorships, I did what everybody else did: is I offered exposure, and I had packages, ABC, gold, silver, bronze, and I would give different deliverables based upon the monetary compensation. You really quickly learn that sponsors aren't looking for exposure because you offer exposure all the time. Sponsors need a lot of other things, but they don't want exposure. So that was when I first started. Let's say 20 years ago. The more recent aha moment is that not only do you not offer exposure anymore, but you don't even have to race anymore to create value for sponsors. The racing is the platform, it's
Mm,
the backbone. It's your credibility, it's your legitimacy, and that's very important. But you don't have to race to represent a brand or a company. You have to be able to be an extension of their marketing arm. So today, with internet and social media and with all these digital communication platforms that we have and all this technology that we have, and we have it in our homes, we have it in our hands, in our phones, we have it all day long, everywhere we go, every event we go to, we are a content creator and a content producer and a content distributor. Whether or not we're sitting in a seat behind a wheel, it doesn't matter. We're all content creators and we're all content distributors, but you need a thumb. Most important thing is a thumb to press record, a thumb to press upload, and a thumb to press share. So a lot of it is just, you just have to do it. We're in a
yeah.
world today where the opportunity is endless. And if you can create value for brands by finding out what you can do that they're not, or they don't have the resources to do, it's pretty easy to partner with them. And we call that sponsorship. If you're going to events in a geographical area where the brand has no presence, you can go on their behalf. And instead of them hiring someone or sending a team from corporate, which costs money, they have to buy plane tickets and hotel and there's travel expenses. Well, instead of them spending that money, they can sponsor you and hire you if you're going to go to that region anyway. You just have to act on their behalf. So that's the biggest thing, is that you don't really have to race anymore to create value. And instead of offering exposure, think about other things that brands might need. A company might need to go to, let's say, the Irwindale Speedway on a certain weekend because they want to promote to the locals in that area. If they were to go and give out samples of their product, they'd have to hire a pickup or rent a pickup truck. They probably have to rent a trailer, maybe find a staff of 3 or 4 employees that can do that for them at the event. And there's expenses, there's a cost involved. Well, if you have a truck or you have a trailer, you have a semi, you have a team, some family members that can help, then they can hire you instead. And once again, they can sponsor you and you can be an extension of their marketing arm instead of them having to go hire temporary help to go do that. So sponsorships is not just about someone giving an athlete or a property money and then that property, that team, that athlete posting a logo and saying, look, I'm being sponsored. No, it's about acting as an extension of their marketing at events and locations and in geographical areas where they don't already reach. If you're going into an area and you see Monster Energy and Coca-Cola all over the place, don't call Monster and Coke because they're already there. They don't need you. Call one of their competitors or a brand that's not in that
Mm,
area. Don't call the company that's already marketing to where you're going. Call the brand that's not there. You have a much likely probability of success of them listening because most good marketing directors are watching what their competition's doing. They know if something's successful. And if something's successful and working for a competitor, I guarantee most brands are going to try it and see if it works for
yeah,
them. So
yeah.
find the most successful brands in racing and then find their competitors and try to form a relationship with those competitors, showing them that you can be an extension of their marketing. I think that's probably the biggest thing that's happened in the past decade and how sponsorships have evolved or changed since I started 10, 20 years ago.
I love it, Alex. And you just really encapsulated kind of these three big non-traditional, not non-traditional, but these aha moments that you've had is, you don't have to be a racer. It's no longer just about the W's, right? How much you're going to be on camera or being shown in the race, right? Because you can control that in your own social and you can control the narrative in a lot of ways as the driver. And to that end, be an extension of that brand's marketing team. And not just, I love this, like you were saying, not just through the exposure you can give them on social, but think outside the box in other ways. I would have never
Yeah,
thought of some of those.
you can take that a little further as well. As so when I was with Lucas Oil, we had the Lucas Oil production studios. We obviously created a lot of race programming and television. I didn't realize before I worked with the studios just how much of the programming that we would insert into a show could have come from drivers and teams that gave us content. Instead of Lucas
Mm,
having to send out a production crew to film events, now with our cell phones, we can go to events and the production quality is not too bad on these things on a high
no,
quality cell phone. If you're a racer and you're creating content, send some of your content if it's really classy and high quality and in the right format. Just check with the content producer to see what kind of format they look for. And you could potentially get your content inserted into their vignettes, into their
yeah,
behind the scenes, into
yeah,
their, it's B-roll footage that you're giving them that they could potentially use in the main show. And they're
yeah.
always looking for good content. So if you have good content, especially if it's a storyline or some kind of controversy, there's a really good chance that you can get aired even if you're not racing. Again, racing is great and that's what you're supposed to do. That's the credibility, the backbone that gives you that status. Most sponsors are not paying you to race. Most sponsors are paying you to represent.
Right.
And representing is both on and off the track.
Yeah, I love that. And you bring out a really good point. And on a recent episode of Creators and Coffee, we were talking about the value for a driver bringing their own media professional, right? So instead of trying to have someone in their pit just get their cell phone out, like have someone who they are there with professional equipment, to your point, really classy, really high-end footage, beautiful footage of the race that then as the driver, that's one of those things I can be offering. Hey, I have a professional with me filming my content. I can get you access not to, to additional content, to B-roll, and that can be one of those things to set yourself aside and yet another reason to work with professional videographers, professional media, is to capture that. I think that's just such a great tip.
And even if you don't have that, because let's say you can't afford it or you don't have that full time photographer, videographer that can attend a 3 day event with you, there's a really good chance that a brand can send somebody. When Jason Coleman met iBox Springs, it was initially for creating content, creating videos. It
Mhm.
started out that iBox supplied the photographer, the videographer, the editing, and they did the videos. And Jason showed up and he raced. Well, guess what? That has now evolved into a several year primary sponsorship. He is the iBox Springs trophy truck. And it's a much larger than just the media, but it started out with just media. Ibach helped with media. Now Ibach is his primary.
That's
So
great.
those types of relationships can evolve. If you have media or you know that a sponsor is going to create media, it's much easier to get more sponsors involved as well. Because now you go to sponsor two and say, hey, I'm going to create this media for sponsor one, and it's going to be on the following outlets, not just on social media, but it might be used in this show. It might be used in this video, and it's going to be used on the website. And if you'd like to be part of that or piggyback that, why don't you sponsor me as well? And I'll make sure your logo is alongside. So a lot of it has to do with using the leverage of strong partners that are already in a market and positioning alongside them.
And I loved what you said too, as we're, looking at it and who to go after, right? Because it's one thing getting the sponsorship, but I think it's also there's strategy around who you're going after. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I want Monster, oh, I want Pennzoil, or I want these big brands. But to your point, they're already sponsoring maybe multiple people in your racing category, in your racing series, right? And it may not make sense, but looking at that competitor, what's a drink company not? Is Liquid Death sponsoring anybody? Maybe go for them. Go the water angle. Go the, something a little different. Go the Starbucks coffee angle. Who knows? And their nitro cold brew, like do something a little different. It made me think of this story. When you think about the power of playing competitors off of each other, I don't know if you ever heard this. If you read Richard Branson's very first book, Losing My Virginity, he talks about it. So when he was a teenager, he started a newspaper, which is fascinating because he was also dyslexic. So starting a newspaper, and it was a youth-oriented newspaper, and he had very little money, and so he could only produce the money or produce the paper if he had enough advertisers to pay to produce the paper. So he had to get the advertisers first before they could print it. And so he literally went in the phone book and called up, and then again, this is a long time ago, so they're not, it's not as easy, but he called up the local Pepsi office there in London, and he called up the local Pepsi office and said, hey, we're creating this youth newspaper, to get the word out and to get the news out to the youth here in England. And it's going to be huge. And look, Coke already took out a half page ad. So they are really trying to connect. And he was like, they had it. I'm at a payphone. Literally, he was at a payphone. And Pepsi's like, oh, well, we want a full page ad. So, but it was just as great
That's
because he
interesting.
he knew the power of playing a competitor off the competitor. And, he's a straight street hustler entrepreneur. He wasn't afraid of a little white lie there to get that ad. And clearly he's gone on to have a very successful career. So I'm sure Pepsi was happy to be a part of it, but it was just a great
So,
story that
there's
kind of,
another angle on that. I'll interrupt you real quick. There's
yeah,
another angle on
I
that
love it.
I think is pretty interesting. As well as getting a competitor on board, you can also get allies on board. Now, I'll tell you what I mean is, I'll back up for a second, is I have a monthly membership program where members, I do one-on-one coaching, and they call me just whenever, if they're going to have a meeting with a sponsor tomorrow, they'll give me a call today and we'll talk about what they should say. I look at decks and proposals, and I try to piece that, help them put it in a way that reaches the sponsor. Well, a couple of weeks ago, one of my members said that he's sponsored by a manufactured home manufacturing company. So they
Mm,
make pretty much manufactured homes.
yeah.
And then he was wondering what sponsor to go after next because he had one primary. Now he wanted a few more. That way he would complete his car. And I said, well, look at it like this: if the manufactured home builder needs carpets, there's probably a carpet brand they work with. If they need flooring, there's a flooring brand they work with. If they need appliances, they might work with the dishwasher company or a microwave company. They probably need windows, so they probably work with a window company. Look at all the different brands that are already working with that manufactured home and start there because they're already working together, which means they're probably also already promoting together. And they might also already have budgets to work together, cross marketing budgets. There's a really good chance they do, and most likely they do. And like with Polaris is a factory. When they started the factory team, the example I always give is You go to buy a Polaris UTV. Well, first thing you're going to do is probably upgrade the tires. You're going to get BF Goodrich tires. You're going to
Yeah.
upgrade the wheels, put on Method race wheels, maybe upgrade the sound system, put on Rockford Fosgate. If you're going to buy an upgraded UTV, well, you're probably going to finance it. I don't know too many people that pay cash. What did the Polaris team do? Well, they first went to Polaris. They got Polaris involved. Then they got BF Goodrich involved. Then they got Method Race Wheels involved. They got Rockford Fosgate involved. They got Synchrony Financing involved. When you finance something, you have to buy insurance. They got Progressive involved. And it makes sense because all the brands on the factory Polaris race team are all brands that you can purchase at the time when you're going to buy a new RZR or a new off-road vehicle. They're all brands that you have options from. Sometimes you want to look at the partners of the existing
Yeah.
sponsors to see who they work with. You were given the example of like an energy drink, if they're already in the market. Well, now let's look for retailers that might sell that energy drink, whether it's a Circle K or
Mhm.
7-Eleven or something.
Yeah.
Go for those because they tend to work very well together.
I love it.
When a
Love that
manufacturer works
advice.
with its distributor and its retailer and their suppliers, those are the best sponsorships when all the components work together. It goes the opposite direction. If you're sponsored by Rolex, let's say, don't approach Walmart and Target for sponsorship
Right.
because you're probably not going to buy a Rolex at a Walmart or a Target. Approach a retailer that sells the same quality of product as your sponsors. You
Right.
have to make sure that the brand integrity and the positioning, whether it's high volume, low cost, or low volume, high cost luxury good, you have to make sure that all the sponsors are the same.
So I do think I've seen a car that has both the Rolex and the Target logo on it. I feel like I've seen that. But no, totally. I love that strategy, right? It's almost like sometimes the phrase the circular economy. It's like a circular sponsorship program, right? Like it all works together really seamlessly. And I think that's great. Now,
The
this
goal
is,
is you want your sponsors to work together.
yeah,
You want the brands to work together because if they cross promote,
oh,
then
for
they
sure.
each benefit from the other company's promotion and it just escalates and it elevates the value of that sponsorship.
Yeah.
So try to position companies that will work together.
Yeah, I love that. So this has all been great advice for the driver.
Coffee.
Oh, I know, right? I'm drinking water. It's
Come on.
I know I can't drink caffeine after 2 o'clock or I'll literally be up all night. What is your advice again? Because you've seen the best of the best, but a lot of the brands that you do have on, they are the best of the best. They have big budget, so I think sometimes some of the smaller brands in our industry are kind of like, well, of course they can do that. They're huge. They're giant. They have these big marketing budgets. Their owner gets it. What can we do? Like, we can't do all that. We don't have that money. What could just your average brand, from a sponsorship standpoint, what's just one thing they can do that just to take their sponsorship program to the next level and make it better without having to spend a ton of money and, hire a whole person to manage it?
I think one of the most important things is that sponsorship directors and brand managers and marketing directors, they need to trust endemic partners. If you're a marketing director and you're going into off-road and you don't know anything about off-road, trust those people who are in off-road as to who the market is and how to market the brand correctly. Marketing directors have to market their product to all demographics. And most of the racing segments that we're involved with are very specific. Off-road is a very specific demographic. Drag racing is a specific demographic. Drifting is a very specific demographic. Motocross is a very specific demographic. You don't use the same marketing approach for all of those. So the marketing director who has to market to all those markets, they have to rely on the endemic experts, usually the drivers, the team owners that are in the field. Wing Lam, who owns Wahoo's Fish Taco, he's one of the co-founders. Him and his brothers founded it. I love to say this. It's an example I give a lot. He says, if you're going to go surf Pipeline, show up with Jerry Lopez and the locals will let you drop in and catch a wave. Otherwise, you're never going to catch a wave. Locals will block it out because that's their wave. If you're going to skate Encinitas Skate Park, you show up with Tony Hawk. The locals will let you in. If you're a new brand manager, or if you're a brand manager in a new market and you don't know that market, it's kind of like Nike going into skateboarding 20 years ago. They came in and they ran ads and they said, we're extreme sports. Nike got chewed up and spit
Yeah.
out. They hated those ads. The endemic skateboarders knew that had nothing to do. First off, you don't use the term extreme sports. It's action sports, not
Right.
extreme sports. Nike screwed up. Then they came in and then they sponsored some top riders. Paul Rodriguez. They sponsored some of the best skateboarders in the world. And they let the skateboarders then
Hmm.
represent the brand.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Nike created the Nike SB for Nike skateboarding. And boom, next thing you know, they became one of the best selling skateboard brands in all of footwear.
Right.
And that's back when I was with Osiris Shoes. So I remember those days very well. Trust the experts in the market to represent the brand in a way that the market
Mm,
understands the brand. You
that's
don't
good.
want to misrepresent your brand because you come up with a corporate, cheesy, non-authentic, non-official, the authenticity I think is the most important thing. But you definitely want someone who understands the market to represent the brand so that it's credible.
And again, and it doesn't have to be the most expensive off-road racer, right? Or it doesn't have to be like if someone's been in the market for a long time, any brand can put together there are sponsorships to be had and there are ways to do it. You brought up before we, got on this a little bit earlier, you also had another tip for brands I thought was really interesting and something I hadn't thought about that I don't think a lot of brands think about. Can you mention the E3 spark plugs example? Because I think that's something that a brand would probably never even think was a thing or know that they could do that.
So that goes right in line with what we were just saying, position alongside an endemic. If you're going to enter a market where you're not in, show up with someone who's in that market. Todd Airy, who's the founder and the president of E3 Spark Plugs, he was part of the Team Lucas program that I was involved with when I was at Lucas Oil. He loves to tell the story, and I think I'm going to get most of it right, but I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. So Todd was in, I believe it was Asia, China, and he got real sick at one point. So he spent a lot of time in the hospital. After he returned back to the US, he started watching a lot of television while he was in the hospital. And he watched race programming because he was just starting E3 Spark Plugs and wanted to figure out, I want to market to the racers. And he kept seeing Lucas Oil, Lucas Oil, Lucas Oil, Lucas Oil in banners and in visibility and in vignettes and all over the television in the racing shows that he was watching. So he literally cold called Lucas Oil. He called the receptionist and said, I'd like to meet somebody in marketing because I'd like to position my brand alongside yours and I'd like to piggyback the television that you're creating. That literally led to the creation of the Team Lucas program that I was involved with. I started in 2011. The Team Lucas program started before that, and it had Geico Insurance, it had Continental Tire, then their General Tire division, it had Rockstar Energy, it had E3 Spark Plugs, had all of these companies that positioned alongside Lucas Oil and all of the events and the shows that Lucas went to, and all of the other brands got visibility with it.
Yep.
So they all pooled money. Part of what we did is we pooled everybody's money and we put on bigger, better events, created more media, marketed that media and marketed those events, and all the brands involved got that publicity from it. Things have changed a little today because it's no longer just about media and publicity. Today it's a lot about activation as well. It's about connections and keeping the connections open and viable so that I said we live in this electronic highway where we're all connected. We're all connected digitally. If you send me a message, what's going to get me to open it?
Yeah.
Well, you and I both get a lot of messages, and I'm sure everybody else does too. We get a lot of emails, a lot of junk calls, a lot of spam calls, a lot of DMs and emails that we don't open. Well, you open it if you know the person. If Erica is messaging me, calling me, I'm going to pick it up because I know you. And it's like, hey, what's going on? If it's a stranger, I'm probably not going to pick it up. So that's where your team riders, that's where your sponsored athletes can come in, is they are the ones that if a message is sent through them, there's a
Hmm.
good chance their fans and their followers will read the message, open the email, pick up the phone, they'll respond. And so again, it's like kind of what Todd Airy did with E3 is he positioned alongside a brand that was already in motorsports, and that literally brought E3 into the limelight, at least in motorsports at the time. So
Yeah.
I think that was a really, really clever approach.
If you're a marketing director at a brand or you're the person who's trying to do sales and marketing and you're trying to figure it all out, reach out to another brand. Go talk to these other brands when you're at PRI and like make those connections, make those partnerships. Say to them, he cold outreached to Luke. He didn't know anybody. He didn't have big family friends. He cold called, right? Like, you can do that. A lot of these, I think of like go see Alex's session at PRI. And I think, any of those brands that get off the stage, if you said, hey, I would love to talk to you for 30 minutes about your sponsorship strategy and how you do that. And make that connection, make that ask. I think it's, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think a lot of people don't think that that's even a thing that they could do. They wouldn't even think of it. Right. And Todd, it didn't exist before he called, and he made it a thing.
He created the whole department that I worked for almost a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
So it's great. I love it. Well, Alex, this has been so great, so informative as always. Again, we'll put in the notes, in the comments on the YouTube, all of the sponsorship summits and the things you have coming on. You'll be speaking at PRI. You've got a membership program. So for drivers, and I would say for brands too, brands should be going to these sponsorship summits. If you really want to get serious about how you build your racer partner programs, listen to the best and how they do it and adapt it for what's right for your brand. It's been great having you on and look forward to seeing you in Indy.
Well, thanks again, Erica. I appreciate the invite.